So can we expect this Vikings secondary to actually be, good? Let's figure it out here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen every single day. Today on the show, let's talk a little bit about cornerbacks. So this is a topic that came up because in my brain, because I read an article at PFF today that they revamped their coverage grades. And I want to talk a little bit about that and talk about PFF in general, because our process and how we decide to use a tool like PFF or SIS, so Sports Info Solutions, or anything like that is the kind of discussion that you kind of have to have in July. But also actually go over these Patrick Peterson and PFF's idea of Patrick Peterson changed a whole bunch, and their idea of Cam Dantzler. Andrew Booth lives in this world as a total unknown. Same with a Caleb Evans, any rookie really. But really, it's those two. What do we get out of those two guys? Let's talk about how they fit in the scheme and all of that stuff. And I guess let's start there. Let's start with the actual players. So basically, the way PFF changed things, they used to kind of grade. They do their every player, every play thing, right? And they would grade, if you cover a wide receiver, they would grade, did you get burned or not? Did you get targeted or not? And all these different factors that would affect the grade. But now they've sort of divided that up into three separate grades, before the catch, at the catch, and after the catch. So, did you get open before the catch? Then the wide receiver gets a plus and the corner gets a minus. And did you perform well at the catch point? Did you not get open before the catch? So that's a minus, but you made the catch anyways, so that's a bigger plus. And then did you do anything after the catch? And it has helped them sort of categorize things a little bit. I think it's an improvement to their process, and I will circle back to that. But for now, suffice to say, they developed a new metric, which is coverage over expectation, basically, or something like route covered over expectation, that kind of adds all this stuff up versus what you would expect, and an opponent adjusts and everything. So, a go route against Devontae Adams is a lot different than a 4-yard button hook against somebody's random fifth receiver. And in that metric, Patrick Peterson over the last 3 years ranks top 3. That's really interesting because the last 3 years have been the worst of Patrick Peterson's career. I mean, this is, 16, 17, 18. That was when Patrick Peterson, or, even before that, was the best corner in the league, arguably. And it's been, 2019 when he was injured, and then he had his suspension, and 2020 wasn't great. And then 2021, he was with the Vikings, but there was some controversy. Was he good or wasn't he? I don't know. I always thought Patrick Peterson was very good, but a lot of people disagreed. And I mean, he got targeted once or twice a game, and he earned that. And that was kind of what I always had. He was a very solid guy, clamping down his side. But it was just that he couldn't do more than that anymore. He used to be able to do more than that and follow people around. And now you give him a side and he clamps down that side, and that's great. And of course, as he gets older, what ability will he still have kind of becomes the question. But it was nice to see PFF kind of acknowledge that Patrick Peterson was far and away the best corner the Vikings had, when before they had Cameron Dantzler as a top 10 guy, which is wild. I mean, there's some small sample stuff because Bashad Breeland started most of last year. But they basically, their take was that Cameron Dantzler played corner at a nearly elite level in 2021. And I don't think anybody could look at 2021 and really think that. He was fine. I thought he improved over 2020, which had its ups and downs. He started awful in 2020, and I thought he was actually on a trajectory to get pretty good. And in 2021, he kind of stayed on that trajectory where he played as a solid, a good backup corner. maybe a borderline starting corner, and you hope that he just continues to grow. And I've been of the mind, and I guess I'll reiterate this point, I have been of the mind that Ed Donatell's scheme is way better for Cam Dantzler than Mike Zimmer's was. And I sort of believe the opposite about Patrick Peterson. Patrick Peterson was so perfect for that man match quarters, like the processing that takes and being able to make calls on the fly. It really utilized a lot of Patrick Peterson's experience, but it also didn't ask him to, play like a shutdown corner like he was 5 years ago. I thought it was really just kind of naturally fell into a very well-tailored place for him. Like it really just happened to work out. And Donatell's scheme involves a lot more single coverage, a lot more one-on-one, and there is quarters sometimes. So I'll try to be really quick about it. So quarters is what Mike Zimmer did, and a lot of those coverages they were half field coverages. So you'd call one coverage on one side of the field and another coverage on the other side of the field. So that would allow you some versatility. That was sort of the strength of the whole thing. And in Donatell's scheme, they still do a lot of that, but it'll be one quarters coverage on one side of the field and then one halves coverage on the other side of the field. So it's quarter, quarter, half. Also known as cover 6. You probably recognize that if you play Madden, or if you're vaguely familiar with the general coverage shells and stuff. It's a lot of cover 6. So those concepts are still going to be used, and Peterson will still be doing that. But there will also be a lot more just, all right, we're here in Buffalo. You got Stephon Diggs one-on-one, and last time Patrick Peterson went up against Stephon Diggs, he got totally cooked. So that is, I don't know, a reason for concern. And always, you could just hit an age cliff and holy crap, suddenly he's really slow. Well, this stinks, right? So there's always going to be that. But it's nice to acknowledge that 2021 from Patrick Peterson, quality season. And I am very, very excited to go buy into another one. That's why I was really, really pounding the table for Patrick Peterson over free agency. As for Dantzler, is kind of the opposite, because all of those calls and the things, the places where Patrick Peterson's veteran experience comes into play, young Cameron Dantzler, not so much. He played a lot of press man at Mississippi State. I'm not familiar. Somebody who covers that team or knows that team is going to have to tell me exactly what their scheme is. But it was a lot of press a guy, jam a guy, be a dog, be a cover corner. And I think Donatell can ask corners for more of that kind of thing and less of the complicated quarters stuff. So I think it advantages Dantzler, it disadvantages Peterson. And then, of course, who knows what to make of the rookies, right? We got to see how they play out. But either way, it sort of makes me want to spin this off into a broader conversation about PFF grades. Because what I basically said here, the information I gave you, is that PFF has essentially admitted that they should be higher on Patrick Peterson and lower on Cameron Dantzler, because they took him out of the top 10, right? I don't know where he lives now on the list, but that PFF has retooled their coverage grades to be more aligned with public opinion in that particular, and it happens to be, I should say, more aligned with public opinion in that particular case. But I want to talk more about PFF in coverage, and then even zoom it out further and talk about PFF grades in general and how we utilize them and why I don't anymore. Just stick with me. But first, let me talk to you about this. Look, we've all been tight on cash here and there. It happens. You need a gallon of gas, or you're wondering how you're going to afford a birthday gift or something. That is where Dave can help. Dave is a banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. You can finally tackle whatever expenses have been stressing you out, and there are no hangups, no interest, no credit check, none of that stuff. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch, you need a little help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Future you will thank you. So BetOnline has a new top 50 most important players list, like a most valuable players, the ones that move the betting lines the most, that affect their betting lines the most. That top 50 list will start coming out July 18th on Locked On NFL. There's more than a couple Vikings on there, so make sure you tune in. Let's talk a little bit about PFF grades in general. So a huge problem that I had with PFF's coverage grades has been solved by this new thing. Looks like it was headed up by Timo Risk at PFF. He's PFF_Moo. And a huge problem that I had, the way I understood PFF grades, and if anybody from PFF is listening and wants to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, please feel free. But my understanding of PFF grades was that they have, unless they've expanded, 3 graders will touch each play. So they'll assign a game to 3 graders, and they will all independently grade the game. And so if there's any outliers, then they can kind of adjust for that. If the 2 guys say this play was good and one person says, wait, no, that play was awful, they can sort of keep outliers and random biases and kind of guard against that. And they grade each player on each play from a scale of +2 to -2 in increments of 0.5. So like plus 1.5 or -0.5 or whatever. And then they have 2 checkers. Now the graders, I think most of them played at like a college level, at least played at a high school, like they've played the game before. I don't think they have anybody grading that hasn't. I know that's like a big PFF thing. That I don't know if that's actually true. And the checkers, and these guys just go over the grades and they make sure that there's nothing like glaring that was missed. It's kind of a QC, a quality control process. And those are very often former pro players like Bruce Gradkowski, there's like former pros or at least former college players. So they're kind of having somebody with an eye for football like check over that stuff, right? And make sure that there's no like glaring misses or oh, that was actually that player's fault because this was the call, that kind of thing. But they nowhere in that process are they trying to guess play calls or anything like that. And so that's where a lot of the incongruences can come. There was a famous one last year with Patrick Peterson, a busted coverage against the Cardinals that PFF assigned to Patrick Peterson, but that wasn't his assignment. He had the one receiver, the outermost receiver, and that was a comeback, and he covered that really well. And there was a corner route that was the bust, and it was supposed to be Mackenzie Alexander. Mackenzie Alexander passed it off because he didn't think it was his job, passed it to nobody, and I think it was Rondale Moore was all alone for a touchdown. And PFF credited that to Patrick Peterson because they are not going to try to guess, and Peterson was the closest defender because Mackenzie Alexander passed it off and started going back upfield. So they credited it to Peterson, even though, you go back into the film room and Mackenzie Alexander's the one's probably getting yelled at over that. That's the kind of thing that PFF, they won't try to guess. And if there is like any uncertainty, sometimes like they'll throw a lot of plays out doing that. But a lot of it is if you aren't targeted or if you're like the nearest defender to the target, whether or not that's your job, you might end up getting the credit for it. And with a pure man defense, that's fine. With a zone defense, that's also fine. Like an old school, like true spot drop, you've got this landmark to this landmark zone defense, that's okay. But the way defenses have kind of evolved in the last 10 years have been a lot more matching, a lot more we are using zone principles but man techniques, or a lot more, I'm going to cover you man-to-man until you get to the 20-yard line. Now you're the safety's job. And if the quarterback hits you in the middle of that pass-off, whatever that seam is, whose fault was it, right? Who do you credit that to? And I'm sure you could ask a bunch of different teams, a bunch of different players. You get a bunch of different answers there. And so you leave a little bit of like meat on the bone in terms of analyzing that play and crediting it. And so what I kind of found, especially as, if you have access to all 22, watch some, or just go on YouTube and watch some all 22. There are cut-ups on YouTube or there are analysis on YouTube, and you can just like mute the person and just like watch and say, okay, if I were a PFF grader, what would I give? Watch one player through the whole thing and see what you would give to that player. And you kind of start to realize like, there's a lot of plays where my guy wasn't really targeted, but he did something that was either good or bad, but maybe just in a minor way. And so what you'd end up having with corner grades, basically, if you weren't targeted and you weren't like torched in coverage or something like that, or wasn't like an extremely obvious play, and it was like a lot of plays happen if you watch a corner over the course of a game. There are a lot of plays where the wide receiver's running a clear out route and you didn't really have to do anything. You just kind of had to turn around and run with him, and that wide receiver wasn't putting a bunch of moves on it because he knows it's just a clear out route. And you just kind of have to, your job is just to turn around and just be with him. And you can almost see players going like half speed on those routes because they're just not the most important ones and they're saving their energy. And on those, PFF will give you like a 0, right? It's, neutral, like this wasn't really your play, whatever. So give you a 0.0 like average. And so those 0.0s would like add up, and then you would be targeted on 2 plays in the game, and one of them you'd break up, and the other one would be, a catch, and that like those 2 plays would drive your entire grade. And I think that's the problem that PFF has solved here by at least breaking it up, where if you are sticky with a guy and then they make a catch over you, and that's the only thing that happens to you all game, they still have a way to like analyze your other plays, say, oh, you really ran with them and that was good. And if there's no catch pointer after the catch, then sure, but at least they're like making more of a concerted effort to really chart if you were with the guy you're supposed to be with. But that whole system is still very much, and this is going to be the critique that I still hold, I think a huge step forward for PFF, and I really, really like what this is. But as Timo even said, like there's a lot of work to do, and I think part of the work to do, if you ask me, is they have to adapt the system to be a little bit more nimble when it comes to things that aren't pure single man coverage. Like the way that article is written, I'll link it in the show notes. If I remember, I always forget, so yell at me if I forgot. But the way that that article is written is very much trained on like a single coverage example, which obviously because it's the simplest one. But I like my question is like, what if you're like the vert hook? And a vert hook is a man match term, it's a saving term, where your job will be, it'll be like a slot corner, sometimes a linebacker. Your job will be to push the 2. So say there's Cooper Kupp is the second innermost receiver and he is running a corner route. Your job is to redirect him and push him. And then you're probably playing something underneath. So you get your hands on him. Now, if you don't get your hands on him well enough, the coverage is designed where the safety who's going to be picking that guy up needs that influence as help because he'll be, aligned very far away from where he needs to be. So he needs that redirection, that influence to help, and buy him time or whatever. And if you don't do a good enough job pushing, the safety might be hung out to dry, and then suddenly the safety's late to the play, and Cooper Kupp gets a big giant catch. What do you do with that? Now, if you're watching that play and you're a coach and you knew he was the vert hook and he totally botched the push, the redirect, or it's the wall, I think is the football-y term for it. He totally botched the wall, and then the safety didn't stand a chance and would have had to be, Ed Reed to make the play. PFF is going to credit that to the safety, and the coach is going to look at that and say, hey, why didn't you get a good enough push? Like, is PFF doing that? Are they saying, oh, you were trying to redirect the 2 and you failed to do it, there's your minus? Or are they going, underneath thing and he wasn't targeted, that's a 0.0? That's what I think the next step needs to be for PFF, but it also it means that they need to build entire systems understanding that some coverage responsibilities are more complicated than try to be, in a guy's pocket and swat the ball away. There's a lot more coverage than that. There's be over the top of it, and there's be, did you set up your bracket right? Did you position yourself right? Are they going to start downgrading people who are in trail position? Because trail position is very much a purposeful thing in some coverages, especially poach coverages, which are half field coverages, but the other safety comes and is like basically coming from the other side of the field to try to pick something off, and hopefully the quarterback didn't account for him because it was a half field read. That's how Cam Bynum got his interception on Lamar Jackson last year. And in that, you would often have a cornerback in trail position where basically he'll be, 2 steps behind the receiver to not only create the illusion that that receiver is open, but also take away anything that would be thrown behind the receiver so that he has to lead. If the quarterback's going to throw that enticing open ball, he has to lead the receiver, and hopefully he's throwing the ball directly into a safety's arms, trying to lead him, right? And that's what you're trying to do with a poach coverage. But if you're in trail position, it looks like you're behind. Are you going to get a minus for that, even though that's what you're instructed to do? Those are, some of that is questions. Some of that is, I think, a next step that needs to be added. But I'm a big fan of incremental improvement. I don't think you need to fix every single problem all at once. If you try to do that, you'd never fix a problem. So that's pretty cool. But I'd also want to expand this to PFF grades like as a whole and just talk about why I've removed them from my process. And I'm not saying you necessarily have to either, or you have to start ignoring them or whatever, but I just kind of want to talk about where I have come to in terms of learning and like growing with the game. So when I was breaking down the 2020 season after the fact, I was using a lot of PFF grades as kind of a proxy for things I didn't watch closely or I didn't know. 2019, I was really bad about this, and I was relying a lot on PFF grades and data. It was not, Danielle Hunter did this, and that. It was Danielle Hunter got 5 pressures, and a pretty good pass rush grade. Like that was kind of like really ingrained in my process, and I sort of realized I can't really recount to you or describe to you how Danielle Hunter plays. Like I don't know. And this was a couple years, like I didn't know what his game was. All I knew is he averages this, I knew a lot about how productive he was, but I didn't have a lot of sense for like how he won. And this was big time with Justin Jefferson too. His rookie year, he was electrifying. I knew all about his yards per route run, but I needed to kind of go back to the drawing board and really watch and understand, okay, but how is he winning? And I can say stuff that nobody really, it's like, he's a good route runner. Okay. Yeah. Nobody's going to disagree with that. But what does that mean? What does that tell you? Does that teach anybody anything? And I kind of realized because I had used PFF so much in my kind of week to week coverage of the team that I had sort of prevented myself from actually learning more about the ins and outs of the game. So my goal for 2021 was to purge PFF entirely from my process. And I don't think you heard it much, except for, sometimes there's like undeniable things about like target share, route yards per route run, that were like huge talking points that I had to address. But otherwise, like you didn't hear me go, and then he got this as many pressures and this is his PFF grade and all that stuff. I muted the letters PFF on Twitter. I muted all the PFF accounts that I follow. That they can still talk to me and stuff, but I didn't want to have it on my timeline. And I wanted to, like, when I'm looking at social media or when I'm looking at anything, I want a completely non-PFF experience of watching football. Not because I think PFF is the stupidest thing ever and they're wrong all the time and blah, blah, blah. No. It's fine. But because I had realized I was using it so much as a crutch. And because I felt like for 3 years, I felt like I could get on this mic, on this show and be like, and he got a 78 grade and gave up 3 pressures and felt like that was an apt description of his game. And I described how the lineman did, and I felt like that was enough information. Because I felt like I could do that, I wasn't watching. I wasn't trying to come to a more like intuitive understanding of a player in his game and how they won and how they lost. I was kind of only concerned with how many times. And that sort of obsession with like quantifying football was preventing me from learning football. And so I sort of went fully into the other side. And so that's why like by week 3, I was watching protection clinics from 1994, by the end of the season, I had read a bunch of coverage books and listened to a bunch of clinics from Alabama and Akron State and all this stuff about how coverages work and came to a much better understanding. And I don't think I would have gotten that if I didn't like purge PFF out. So I'm not going back to using PFF's grades and stuff. Their analysis is fine. Go ahead, have fun with it. I'm not going to disparage it or call it the worst thing ever. But I think my experience of football has been enhanced because I sort of took the life jacket off and learned how to sink or swim on my own, if that makes sense. And that's the thing with like PFF grades. But I mean, I could probably complain about the grades for an hour, but it is out of a place of like wanting PFF to improve. And I know that people from PFF do stumble upon this show sometimes. And I think the resources and energy that PFF has at its disposal is unbelievably powerful. As evidenced by the fact that like every team pays them to basically do QC coach work for them because they're just a much more efficient apparatus. That is just a strict improvement to the league, by the way. Like the fact that all the teams pay PFF for their charting data is just a more efficient apparatus, and it makes every single team better, and that's awesome. I think that's great. Some teams pay for more consulting services than others, and that's probably going to be a bit more of a difficult sell for people who don't like PFF. But like the charting stuff that they do is invaluable to teams, and it's awesome. So this is not the PFF is bad show. But it's more, I don't know, just telling the story of like, when you hear the thing that they say all the time, hey, don't take PFF grades as gospel. Even PFF will say, don't take our grades as gospel. We don't expect you to take our grades as gospel. And that's kind of interesting. And then you get an article where they did entire math that is trained on only the grades, right? It sounds like PFF is being taken as gospel. And people will take PFF as gospel, even though they're instructed not to. But I think, and I think that's totally fine. Agree with PFF, disagree with PFF, come up with your opinion. But even if I did that, if I said, man, PFF gave Irv Smith a really bad grade in that game, and I just super disagree. I thought he played so much better. I'm still like anchoring my analysis around what somebody else thinks of the game. And I just felt like that wasn't the best thing for me and the content that I make and everything. I don't think that's the best for you in the audience. So I kind of wanted to do it the hard way, but the right way. And if you want to join me on that journey, I welcome you, but no pressure, of course. Tomorrow on the show, no idea what we're going to do. At some point this week, I want to talk about Kirk Cousins versus Joe Burrow because there's a really interesting comparison there. And it won't be a thing that's like, and that's why Joe Burrow is better than Kirk Cousins because that's boring as hell to me. But more of like what's like contrasting the two can really highlight some differences in play. Some of the stuff I talked about earlier in the week, or last week. But if I can get to that this week, that'd be cool. If not, we'll do history stuff and more random conversations like this. Remember, keep an eye on my Twitter account at Luke Brown NFL on Saturday. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.